A breakthrough in U.S.-China ties as leaders of the world's two largest economies meet for the first time in 6 years. Our trade tensions thawing after agreements were reached on a number of sticking points. U.S. President Donald Trump lauding the summit with his Chinese counterpart as a roaring success. Xi Jinping, though, offering a rather more muted response, saying some consensus has been reached.
I thought it was an amazing meeting. He's a great leader of a very powerful, very strong country, China. And what can I say? We have, it was an outstanding group of decisions, I think, that was made. A lot of decisions were made, too. There wasn't too much left out there.
Our trade topping the agenda with tariffs front and center. The U.S. slashing levies on China to 47% from 57% after immediately suspending a 10% rate put in place over fentanyl. China vowing strong action on the export of precursor chemicals used in the production of the deadly opioid. The American leader pointing to Beijing's pledge to keep exports of rare earths flowing, a reprieve for the U.S. after China agreed to put a pause on its latest round of export restrictions for a year, after placing a shock ban on rare earths earlier this month.
We have a deal. Now, every year we'll renegotiate the deal, but I think the deal will go on for a long time, long beyond the year. We'll negotiate at the end of the year, but all of the rare earth has been settled. And that's for the world. I mean, worldwide. This, I guess you could really say this was a worldwide situation, not just a U.S. situation. So we continue to produce the rare earths and buy the rare earths and everything else, when you see from other countries. But China is, that whole situation, that roadblock is gone now. There's no roadblock at all.
Another win for Washington on agricultural produce. Washington says Beijing is set to resume purchases of soybeans from the U.S. along with other products, just months after boycott on imports. Ahead of the Trump-Xi summit, in what is seen by the U.S. leader as a display of goodwill, China purchased its first cargo shipments of U.S. soybeans in several months. Mr. Trump also saying that China will be able to access U.S.-made chips, including those made by industry leader NVIDIA. On that issue, a key point of friction between the two economies. Beijing had tightened controls over imports of NVIDIA chips, urging domestic tech companies to buy locally in the run-up to this meeting.
Given our different national conditions, we do not always see eye to eye with each other. And it is normal for the two leading economies of the world to have frictions now and then.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says a deal with China has been drawn up with signatures possible next week. Although details are still scarce and are still under works, both the U.S. and Chinese presidents have vowed to maintain regular communication, with Mr. Trump set for a visit to China early next year, and an invitation extended to Mr. Xi to visit the U.S. after that. And when we're joined by our correspondents Si Hui, she's in Busan, Toni Waterman reporting for CNN in Washington, D.C., and Lim Yun-suk is in Gyeonggi. That's the site of this week's APEC gathering. Let's start with Si Hui and Toni. Si Hui, today's meeting, that breakthrough we mentioned in terms of trade ties between the U.S. and China, but from Beijing, a relatively more circumspect response.
Indeed, there was a more circumspect approach from Beijing. But what we saw earlier today, warm interactions all around by both Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi. Mr. Xi himself saying he and Mr. Trump should guide the direction of U.S.-China ties. So it appears that perhaps China is trying to downplay tensions as the priority for this meeting. And Beijing, through the Commerce Ministry earlier today, they had hoped to inject calm and stability stability in U.S.-China ties, saying that the results from today's meeting did not come easy. And they had announced some of the outcomes that had corroborated with what Mr. Trump had earlier announced during his Air Force One interview with reporters. They had said that fentanyl-related tariffs have gone down to 10%. That was previously 20%. They also said that they will suspend for 1 year the rare earth exports rule. They also said that U.S. will suspend a new rule that expands its entity list of export restrictions. But observers, as you mentioned earlier, that breakthrough, they say and they caution labeling this a breakthrough because they say that anything could change at the moment, citing the unpredictability of Mr. Trump, saying that he could go back on his words. China could also possibly back out from this temporary truce, this temporary pause, as what we've seen earlier in May this year, both sides violating the 90-day pause in skyrocketing reciprocal tariffs that we've seen gone up to 125%. So there's still needed, time is still needed to see just how this would unfold.
Toni, let's bring you in there. We heard Si Hui that a great deal could change because, as Si Hui mentions, Mr. Trump could walk these moves back at any one time. In fact, the deal itself has yet to be signed. But Mr. Trump touting this as a very big diplomatic win. Does it, these points that we have reached, narrow significant differences between Washington and Beijing?
Well, President Trump is certainly, as you mentioned, selling this as an outright win for the U.S. He's called it an amazing meeting. He said it was a 12 out of 10, that it has solved nearly every issue that these two nations are facing. And there are some positive gains here for the U.S. Soybean purchases, a pause on these rare earth export controls. But these are things that are really in the short term. If anything, this meeting has shifted the balance of power to the middle into what some analysts are calling a dynamic equilibrium, with both sides still very much entrenched, still dug in on their respective positions, but neither side really dominating the other. They are on equal footing here, and this is something that China has long wanted. And there is sort of this cautious stability at this point, a ceasefire of sorts, because you're right, either side could back down. Trump is a very unpredictable character. One interesting shift here, though, is really since Trump's first term in office, is that China now views trade not as this anchor of stability in the relationship, but rather a tool and a shield in what is an increasingly competitive relationship, not just on the trade front, but in technology, in geopolitics. And China sees at this point that it can wield this sword quite effectively. And you really need to look no further than the rare earths export controls that it imposed. This is something that could have devastating effects, not just here in the United States, but in most of the Western world, particularly in Europe. And so it sees that it can use these tools in much the same way as Trump likes to believe he can use tariffs.
Also, picking up from there, so Toni mentioned this the securitizing of technologies such as rare minerals or rare earth exports. And this is a point of leverage that Beijing has at this point, not just on the US, but as Toni mentions, many other Western economies. So with China agreeing to pause for 1 year, this curbs on export of rare earths, what does it tell us about its longer-term strategy on the using of rare earths?
So indeed, it is a long-term strategy. So this 1 year pause is really just a breathing space for global supply chains. It is not a retreat. And just as Toni had said, that China could possibly be using this as a tool, as a bargaining chip, as we've seen U.S. Giving strong concessions after giving into Chinese pressure over the recent months with these rare earths. And so this really is a signal from China that it is flexible to change as and when the geopolitical situation changes. And so the world was watching very closely to the meeting today, especially in Asia and Europe. Europe, for example, imports 70% of their rare earths from China. for their EVs, electronic goods and magnets, and this has led to them diversifying and stockpiling rare earths. And so with Trump saying that he would visit China in April next year, let's see whether this temporary pause will last till then.
And Toni, so we've reached some agreements on specifically trade issues, but in the run-up to these talks, a lot of commentary on whether, for example, Taiwan might be brought up. So many points on security and diplomacy, geopolitics not brought up in this meeting.
Yeah, and even on the things that appeared to have been agreed to, the details and confirmation remain very vague. So President Trump says that China is going to buy a tremendous amount of soybeans, but China has not really confirmed this. And so far, there has been very few orders placed, really symbolic orders, far off that $12.6 billion in purchases that we saw from China last year. It's still early stages, so that could change. This pause in the rare earth exports is only for a year, which means that this issue is going to have to be revisited very soon and really in perpetuity, it seems, because it's going to have to be renegotiated every single year. And the pause appears to leave in place April's restrictions on the export of 7 rare earths and rare earth magnets, which are really crucial to auto, defense, and chip making industries. There's also no clarity on whether the U.S. is going to allow NVIDIA to sell its powerful Blackwell chips to China. Trump said that it never really came up in conversation. He also said that Taiwan never came up in conversation during this 2 hours practically that they were speaking. And there's no resolution on TikTok, its sale, its ownership, the algorithm. So there are a lot of things that have been left on the table, and the underlying issues here still remain. So at the end of the day, you have President Trump saying that a deal is sealed, but you have President Xi saying that more needs to be finalized. And this really goes back to the core policy clashes between these two leaders. Trump really looking for the optics of a big deal here. President Xi taking a much more measured approach.
Oh, thanks for that. Let's bring in our CNA senior correspondent Lim Yun Sok now. She joins us from Gyeongju, which is, of course, where APEC is taking place. Yun Sok, this meeting between Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi, that took place in Busan. It's about 100 kilometers away from where you are. South Korea, of course, playing a big role in managing what's happening both in Gyeongju as well as in Busan. What part has it played in facilitating these high-stakes talks?
Well, it seems that South Korea has been really working hard behind the scenes to make sure that this summit, and especially the Trump-Xi summit, could actually, take place here in South Korea smoothly. And we have South Korea's foreign and trade ministers early at a press conference describing this APEC as being historic, and not just because it's being held here in South Korea for the first time in 20 years, because of when it's happening at a time when this global trade order is, under this serious strain. Now, Foreign Minister Cho Hyun said that this gathering allowed world leaders to really have frank discussions on how to build trust in global trade and cooperation. And he also called it, that this was a chance for APEC to be able to show that it still matters. And we had the Trade Minister Yo Han-gu, who went further, saying that the APEC is happening in South Korea, a country that has grown through its openness and this multilateral trade, and that itself is highly symbolic. Now, he described South Korea as a bridge between the United States and China, its two largest trading partners, and he said that finding a balance between them is key to regional stability. Now, let's hear what else he said about that Trump-Xi summit.
대한민국 입장에서는 이렇게 우리의 세계 1위, 2위 무역국인 미중이 어떤 균형점을 찾아서 이런 공급망이나 여러 가지 이슈에 대해서 어떤 안정화를 기하는 것이 대한민국에도 부합한다. 그렇게 말씀을 드리겠습니다.
So in many ways, South Korea is saying that it's not just hosting the meetings, but it's also trying to facilitate this dialogue at a time when Washington and Beijing are drifting further apart. And that's why this Trump-Xi meeting here in South Korea has become really the centerpiece of this entire summit here in APEC.
Yoon Suk, of course, South Korea itself concerned with holding its own high-stakes dialogue. Japan's Prime Minister on her first summit with South Korea's president, both of them in the lead-up to this meeting, being almost saying that they are predisposed to making sure that ties have been improving since 2023 and will stay on that positive momentum.
Well, yes, that was the highlight here in Gyeongju. And yes, the two leaders did meet for about 41 minutes, slightly longer than originally planned. And it seems that the two leaders, kept the focus firmly on the future and not dwell in the past that has strained ties for decades. Now, we have President Lee Jae-myung congratulating Ms. Takaichi on becoming Japan's first female leader and said that, in this rapidly changing global and trade environment, it was the two neighbors who share so much in common need to strengthen the future-oriented cooperation more than ever. And he also talked about sharing experiences and tackling not just domestic issues, but also global challenges together between the two countries. Now, Prime Minister Takaichi said that, she wanted to build a stable, forward-looking ties too, and she wanted to use the shuttle diplomacy to stay in close touch with President Lee. Now, earlier in a press conference, Foreign Minister Cho Hyun told reporters that there could also be hurdles between the two sides.
Senior
발전에 걸림돌이 되는 것들이 있는 것도 사실입니다. 그래서 한일 양국의 그 당국자들은 다양한 그 경로를 통해서 그 발전에 저해가 되는 요소들을 상대방에게 전하고 그것을 해소시켜 나가는 노력을 계속해 왔습니다. 앞으로도 그런 것을 통해 가지고 장기적으로 더 크게 발전할 수 있기를 바랍니다.
Talking to Japanese reporters after that summit meeting, Prime Minister Takaichi also acknowledged that there were still difficult issues between the two sides, but she said that they could be overcome through leadership. And she said that she had a very meaningful and friendly discussion with President Lee Jae-myung and that she looks forward to welcoming him to Japan next.
Thanks. That's CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yoon-suk live from Gyeongju, because where the APEC summit continues. And before that, Si Hui reporting live from Busan, South Korea, and Toni Waterman reporting for CNA in Washington, D.C.